Okay, hi everyone. My name is Parth, and I am a member of the St. Andrews Debating Society, and I'm going to be delivering a talk on whip speeches, how to do them, tips and tricks that I've learnt, and hopefully by the end of the session you'll get a better idea of how to do whip speeches and hopefully improve upon them. So let's get started. So I'll be covering a couple of things. So first of all, what are whip speeches and how to do them, what the goals are, and then also how to think about strategy. I think one of the most important things that people tend to not think about during whip speeches is they tend to do the classic whip speech, but then never really think about the strategy about how to do the whip speech in what order, what to prioritize. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you some tips on how to do that. So, first of all, just very briefly, what are whip speeches and how do you do them? Okay, so they are just the seventh and eighth speaker of the debate. So we have government whip and opposition whip. They speak last, and they're crucially there to summarize and evaluate the debate, not just for the entirety of the debate. Obviously, you would be talking about every team, generally most things that have been said in the round, but you're also trying to, as we would call, whip your team into winning the round or doing much better than other teams. So you're trying to not just win for your bench, but to win for your team as well. Uh, Also, they're not allowed to bring in new material, of course. So you can't run new substantive cases. And we'll talk more about what you can do in a minute. But those generally are the main basic things of a whip speech. And you can structure it however way you want, and it's about personal preference. I like to do it by team. Then within team comparisons, I do it by clash, which is called hybrid, which I would recommend because it's just easier also just for beginners in debate, but also for judges to be able to track what you're talking about. If you do it by clash, you'll have to then, it sort of can get messy where you have to flag teams every time that you're talking about material. And sometimes motions may lend themselves well to clash. So this house prefers X over Y motions tend to be better for clashes. The clashes have to be set up. But in debates often where it can be murky or teams are operating on different justifications or parallel argumentation, characterization, and framing, it's often really important to evaluate team contributions. So often hybrid models tend to be better. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the goals of the whip speech and generally going into each of these points. So, positioning. This is also probably the most important thing because when your extension speaker gets up, they are doing something for the debate and they're forwarding the debate for their side, but they're doing something different from their opening or analytically extending. So, for example, giving more mechanisms, a new piece of framework which unlocks everything that they're talking about, all that sort of stuff. But to judges sometimes, and also just for time efficiency in the extension speech, it's often unclear how your extension sits within the round. So, for example, an extension speech may give a lot of material on points, analysis, and things like that. But it's often can be in a vacuum, right? So, for example, opening government may talk something along the lines of, I don't know, healthcare, and then you come in and close in government and talk about mental health. It's unclear why mental health is important within the round. And often the extension speech may do something along the lines of this is what's opening is missing, this is what top half is missing. And this is important because, but it's important to take a look at the motion, the burdens of the motion, and what the change and the extent of change is. Now, the extension speech should do this, but it's important that you are sort of doing a more narrative, story like positioning, which often, is counterintuitive because a lot of sessions and debate are like don't go off on a story, but it's important to sort of set the scene about what your extension is doing. So, what are your extension doing for the wider debate, and also be strategic in your positioning? What is missing? Why is this crucial? Especially if everyone's agreed on a certain burden. So, for example, if the burden is better healthcare, patient patient trust or something like that, if you can meet those burdens better, now's the time to flag them. Secondly, rebuilding. So often after the government whip has spoken, if you are in closing opposition or member of opposition, they should have attacked key cause of your case, unless it's very, very good, of course. And what you need to do is rebuild this. And you're able to do this because it's not new substantive, but it is essential because your extension obviously needs to be, solid enough for you to win the round. Because often, unless your rebuttal is super good, flips everything, it's often very hard to just win on doing other whip speech stuff. So, how would you rebuild? One, you would flag the response and how it interacts with the extension. This is really important. Often, teams will start responding to things, and I, as a judge, do not know what they're doing, why they're rebuilding that part, and why it's crucial. You need to tell the judge, because they may not have tracked that response, or they may have thought that the response was something else. So this is really crucial. Don't lie or straw man, because the judge has already written it down. So often you won't be able to pull the wool over their eyes. But what you can do is flag what the response is doing, because often PTs will give a response and only the best teams will be able to say this is what it's doing for their case. You need to tell the judge why it's not as damaging as they think. Otherwise, you are up to the mercy of the judge in thinking how damaging it actually is. So tell them how it interacts with the extension. So explain what is, be honest, what's literally what the building block of the extension, what's been taken out, why is the Jenga tower collapsed? Be honest about that, because if you have a good good glue to put it back together, that's even better and it becomes more robust. So rebut or frame out the response as usual, but also give even if. This is really crucial. So even if their response is good, you've got other material that still stands as a debate. You've got your own rebuttal that takes out some of their case, which weakens their case more than it weakened you. Or we're okay and bite the bullet and say why it's okay even if this is true. So do those sorts of things very clearly as well, because even if also it boosts your speaker points, but also makes it harder for them because then they can't rely upon that rebuttal to take you out of the round. And finally, it's important to listen, because if you take the first line of what their rebuttal is and then write it down and then go like, oh, this is stupid, or like go off and write 5 things down on your sheet and you're all sort of passing and paying attention. Don't do that. Listen to the entirety of the response and then start thinking about the rebuttal. Why is this important? Because the best rebuttal will be ones that take down your argument's links stage by stage. The links of an argument are most important because the best argumentation is layered and tiered, ones where you give multiple chains. For example, point, characterization, framing, mech 1, 2, 3, weighing. If they take out mech 2, but that mech was more central than challenging your frame, for example, then you need to listen to the whole thing and holistically respond, because obviously taking out one link may damage the entirety of the chain. Okay, then on to rebuttal. A couple of things you should do here. One, you should provide strategic commentary. This is really important, like the flagging of the response in the rebuilding. It's important to explain what your rebuttal is doing in the round and what it's doing for their case. Don't just rebut. Tell me what you're doing and why you're doing it. And in your opinion, how damaging it is. How does it flip? Does it mitigate? Why does it weaken their case? How does it weaken their case? If it has weakened their case, what is it essentially weakened to? Say, for example, you can say in their best case, they now get this, for example. You can rebut in several ways. One, say the claim is inaccurate. Two, question their likelihood. Three, flip on it and say what is not a benefit or a harm in the first place. Question its relevance and importance. This is the easiest thing to do. Just explain they've done a lovely 2-minute mechanistic analysis, but we don't care, and explain why it's not important in the round. Or do your weighing, which I'll come into in a minute, and outweigh that. So this is a really good mechanization. But if you think it's really good mechanization, don't waste your time. Try weighing other material, because it's really hard to beat a really good speaker by just rebutting them. You need to weigh. So be strategic there as well. Don't be superficial. Attack core links, premises, and characterizations. fit the rebuttal in the wider debate. So not just for what one team, but explain what the rebuttal would be doing for the entire round, what it and how it's impacting the round. Also, you can do rebuttals based on tipping points, like you would with arguments. Explain whether the rebuttal meets a tipping point in how it mitigates or flips. Framing and characterization, this is really important. If someone's questioning your premise of the extension, you need to provide some extra lines to add a plausibility check. This is, for me personally as a judge, how I personally judge, plausibility checks to me are more important than mechanisms, and they should just generally be for the average intelligent voter. If you give me 5 mechanisms, but I'm not sure what your framing or characterization is, I'm not going to credit those 5 mechanisms as detailed as I would have done if they had framing or characterization. So adding new framing characterization around in rebuttal or in weighing or in rebuilding would be really good if required. So please make sure you spend your time sort of thinking about those as well. Then remember, it should always be comparative debating, always respond in comparison to your material. Even if you're rebutting, do comparative rebuttal. You can't just talk about a team in isolation unless they made a genuine isolatory problem where it's so gaping or like it's so bad that in isolation that case would not work. So obviously the idea of no automatic fourths would come in here as well. And then weighing, obviously there should be a separate weighing presentation coming up for the SSD training video, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but you can weigh on relevance, importance, specificity, impact, certainty, benefits, tipping points, short-term, long-term. But also what I want to explicitly say for this, which should be more important, is give a weighing framework for the debate. So what have teams implicitly, explicitly agreed on? What have they disagreed on? And what metrics have they used? If you can weaponize their metrics and weigh against them using their own metrics, then that's really good. So give a framework for the debate. What's currently being weighed, what it should be weighed on, and why that weighing metric for everyone's case should be overriding. So, for example, if it's about like a debate about climate change, short term, long term would be really important here, and explain why that should. And if someone's weighed on, I don't know, something like relevance or importance or stuff, that's also really important, but you need to outweigh with other frameworks and explain why they've weighed in the wrong way, and even if their case is good, why actually changing the weighing metric for their own case means that their case becomes less important. So different metrics can have different impacts on how the case is being presented, so you can be really strategic in that way too. And remember, no new substantive either. Okay, finally, how to think about the debate and debate strategy. So, first of all, what is the debate about? This should be stuff that you should be thinking about in prep time. So, if you're a whip speaker, sorry, you need to be writing stuff down, and you need to explicitly be talking about the critical characterizations and the mechanisms in the round, and you would be doing that. And you would be doing preemptive stuff because in an extension you have more time, so you would be thinking about what perhaps top half would say and how you would enter the debate and things like that. You need to be thinking in prep time really heavily on what you think the debate is about, what the bird's eye view is, and explicitly talking about these things. Because then you can go into the round already having an idea about the debate. So you can already have in your head what teams would probably agree on. Try to think of ways to win with this, especially with what likely extensions are going to run. What is likely to be the disagreements, the preemption that you're going to talk about, and how you're going to get around that. Because that saves you so much time, and you can focus on other things like writing down the rebuilding or writing down the rebuttal and stuff like that. This is stuff that you should be thinking about. So don't spend prep time passively as a whip speaker. So yeah, what will the debate be won or lost? And what are the burdens? So think about the key clash that you did in prep and align your whip based on that. Think about burdens of proof and what teams have to prove. If you can attack the premises and mechanisms, etc., based on the burdens of proof, then you're strategically already doing a pretty good job there because you're going to go and attack the core of what they're trying to say. Prepare rebuilding strategies already. Do devil's advocate in prep. Do preemption in prep. Think of responses. Prepare characterization and framing based on your likely extension and opposing sides' arguments. If they don't attack it, well, great. You don't need to do much. But if they, it's even better because you could do even if analysis Op didn't say this if you're on Gov, but they could have said it. But here's the response as to why that's not going to work. That makes your case more robust, more links. You get the highest speaks, and that's really, really important. A quick way to get increased speaks. So always try to prepare rebuilding strategies. Crucial repositioning. So always make sure that you are positioning yourself in the round and what you're doing, the frameworks of the round, everything like that. This is really important, and debates don't exist in vacuums, they're comparative. So remember about this. Team prioritization. I see so many whip speakers start with a team that's obviously third or fourth. And if you're doing it for 30 seconds to take them out of the round because they were terrible, fine, that's fine. But if you know that there's a team that's going to be beating you, but you have a chance to beat them, or you have a chance to whip yourself into the second because they're so good in your opening, you really should be starting with them, because the judge, if they are a good judge, would obviously know what the call is going to be, obviously can tell their argument strengths. So don't start with teams that are not important and waste your 2 minutes on that when you need granular responses with a team that is quite good. So remember about that. And finally, something that I think teams forget about, and whip speakers especially, sometimes, especially in out rounds, but also in very good rounds, and good in top rooms and in middling rooms where you could have a really good opening, sometimes you really shouldn't overextend yourself. And sometimes copying the second and avoiding a fourth, or even getting a third, is the best thing you should be doing. Why? Because your opening runs something really well, and you are now spreading yourself thin and having lackluster responses, or very vague, very weak, or very lack of substance responses, which means that you are not really doing much, but you're trying to do normal wit speech when there are really good teams around. So in rounds, you may have an opening team that runs everything really well. Focus on one bit of weighing or flip rebuttal. This may take more time, and it has more rungs than mitigatory rebuttal. So of course you need to spend more time on this. So don't spread yourself thin, and try to whip yourselves away from the fourth, and think about prioritization and risk aversion of getting that fourth, and try to be flexible on your whip structures. Don't try to have the same approach every time, because there'll be different debates as well. In out rounds, it's more competitive, therefore it's harder to weigh, it's harder to rebut, it's harder to rebuild. Remember, you're trying to get the second, you don't have to get the first. So don't go for low-hanging fruit. Do the team identification. What's the material that clashes most? Try to focus on the best rebuttal. I think that is really important. So that's my whip speech presentation. If you have any questions, please message me on Facebook, Parth Pandya. But hopefully this has given you slightly more advice on how to do whip speeches. And yeah, hopefully see some of you at future tournaments. And thank you very much.